I have had an amazing time getting into One Piece. It has some of the best world building I've seen in any medium, and I'm really just into the setup parts here, getting into SKYPIEA, but also it has just such a vivid cast of characters, and just overall, I think a really phenomenal story. But the best thing that has happened to me since One Piece is engaging with the fandom, engaging with you all that watch these videos and other people who read this series. And everyone has been really, really encouraging along the journey. But it has become abundantly clear that SKYPIEA arc seems to be a love or hate situation. There are very few people that seem to be somewhere in the middle. Whenever I make a post here on the channel or I talk about SKYPIEA being something that I'm about to read, it is polarizing to say the least. I finally have completed SKYPIEA. It took me a little bit longer than I would have liked to because of life, but today we're going to talk about it. And I'm here to find out whether or not SKYPIEA is trash or is it treasure?
Oh my god, you're lame.
I am Jimmy Nuts, one half of the Dudes Talking Manga here on the channel, and I would just want to thank you so much for tuning into this video. If you end up liking, you can hit like. If you hate it, you can dislike it. And if you want to be a part of this journey, you can think about hitting subscribe. It would mean a lot to us here on the channel. But let's talk about SKYPIEA. So the simple version, or the short version of my experience with the SKYPIEA arc in One Piece is that there are some of the very best moments that I have read up to this point as a first-time reader, and also some of the least inspiring moments. So it truly is a bit of a mixed bag, and I can kind of see where everyone is coming from. I do want to make it abundantly clear also that I am reading the manga first and foremost. I am checking out anime episodes as I go and whatnot, but I do prefer to read things rather than watch them. That's just how I am. I'm a book nerd, as you can see, and I really do enjoy reading. So I know that the anime has a bit more filler, and of the little bit of the anime that I did watch in this arc, I know that things are moved around and the timeline isn't exactly the same as the manga. So in that regard, I do think reading the manga probably improved my experience a little bit, just because the pacing seemed to be a bit better. I may be wrong on that, and maybe you can correct me on that in the comments, but I wanted to put that out there just so everyone knows how I experienced SKYPIEA. The one thing I can absolutely say about SKYPIEA is that it ends on a very, very high note in my opinion, and it has me maybe the most excited I have ever been to continue this series. So if you think about SKYPIEA in the grand scheme of One Piece and the totality of the story, I would say that that makes this arc, for me at least, a success. Not every single arc is going to be the biggest and the baddest and the best. What it needs to do, in my opinion, to be a successful arc is move the story along, whether it be at a slower pace or a faster pace, but also, you know, build our characters, introduce new things to this world. And I think that this arc does do that. So in that regard, I think that this is good. I think it's very good. However, before I go into everything that I enjoyed and I loved and I took note of in SKYPIEA, I'm going to talk about the issues I had with it. It's just a bit complicated because there are things in here that are the high of highs, but also there are a couple things that are making me a little bit concerned with One Piece going forward, if I'm being honest, setting me on edge a little bit. And I'm going to talk about why, and a lot of it has to do with just a bit of repetition. SKYPIEA's first half to me was extraordinarily meh, or mid, or whatever you want to call it. I just was having a little bit of trouble getting behind the enemies and some of the character models and overall just the style of them. I loved the setting the whole way through. I did like that, and I wanted to know more about all the technology and stuff, which is going to be a part of what I did like. But I just found that the enemies were a little bit lackluster in this one, even if they maybe had some cool abilities. And there are some exceptions, there are some that I did enjoy. But overall, I thought the models felt a bit redundant, like the round guys that just kept farting. Like, whatever, I guess. It was fine. It didn't last too long. But, like, I would like to see more. Like, in a series that I'm told that everything matters, I felt like those two dudes did not matter. And I also thought that the character models for them just being round, like there was a lot of round characters in SKYPIEA. Am I wrong about that? I felt like I kept seeing round shaped characters over and over and over. So the first half and those enemies being introduced just kind of felt like a miss for me. And this led into having maybe 6 to 8 chapters in the middle of this arc that all had verses in the title because they were going to be fights of whatever random character on our side fighting the bad guys. And maybe if this was in the climax, I would have been okay with this. And I understand that it's shonen, right? So there's going to be fights, there's going to be level ups, people are going to get beat down, come back, they're going to get split up or whatnot. But especially this being so close to Alabasta and all the fights that we got there, it feels like maybe it was just a wee bit too soon to jump back into such a long and similar arc in some ways, even though thematically they are very different. If this was all happening during the climax, I don't think I would have had much of an issue with it, but I didn't feel the stakes at all at any point. And the thing that Oda has been able to do very, very well, I think, at this point in One Piece, is make every battle interesting, at least based on creativity or just cool moments. A lot of these battles did not fulfill that for me. So I just found myself kind of cruising through the battles, waiting for them to be over. I did like the idea of the challenges at first and having to pick a door and which one would you go through. I like those kind of ultimatums for the characters, but none of them really exceeded expectations. Maybe besides Ohm, O-H-M is how it's spelled in the Viz edition. I'll talk about that in my positive section, though. I'm concerned because when it comes to being repetitive, it's going to happen, especially in a 1,000-chapter story. However, I feel like I'm still very early in this journey, and I do worry, and this is what I was talking about when I said that, what is coming in One Piece, I'm a little bit on edge. 1,000+ chapters, I hope that this isn't something that is a continuing thing or a problem. I'm not sounding the Mayday alarm yet, but that's just how I feel. Because this is so close, well, at least it feels like in the timeline to Alabasta, it is hard to not compare these two, especially because their chapter length is very similar. This one's actually even a little bit longer. And I just don't know if it felt as justified to be this long. For instance, Enel, which in the Viz edition is spelled like Eneru, but I'm going to say Enel because it's how I've heard people say it before. But Enel is cool, however, has cooler skills than he is as a character. And to me, Alabasta ends up just feeling like the more heavyweight, proper version of this type of arc. Crocodile is far more interesting than Enel. And again, I wouldn't compare them if they weren't similar sizes and so close together. Wyper, very cool character. I enjoyed the lineage and the story of the people, the Shandorans. I thought all of that stuff was great. However, Princess Vivi is infinitely cooler, in my opinion. And I think that really kept me from getting like emotionally invested, especially in this world, the sky world, I guess, is about to end and we're going to lose everything. I felt the stakes much more in Alabasta. And I think Princess Vivi and Crocodile had a lot to do with that. So I just don't think these characters are terrible. I don't think they're terrible at all, but I don't think that they reach those levels that I know Oda can reach, and we've seen him do it before. If you're getting annoyed by all the negatives, I promise I got a ton of positives as well. They're coming. I just got to get through this real quick. And the very last negative note, it comes with the repetitiveness, but also not from the fights, but I wanted to mention the fact that I feel like a lot of the points and even the thematics of this arc were really hammered in, very heavy-fisted. I think I read the Light of Shandora like 80 times in this. And that's fine because you want to drive the point home. But I felt like there was very little trust for me as a reader. I have a theory that this is probably because a lot of the world building stuff like dials and mantra and all that stuff is really the bread and butter of this arc that's going to matter down the road. And he wanted to have something up front and center for people to latch onto on their first read. So I think that might be why. But I felt like there was very little trust in me as a reader from Oda. And I haven't really felt like that before in One Piece. Now that all that negativity is out of the way, I want to get into what I liked and I loved. I wanted to address the concerns up front. And the reason why is because there's fewer of them than what I like and love. And I feel like if I just tack on the negatives at the end, people who didn't enjoy the arc might feel that I didn't look at it with too much of a critical eye. And I do. I read these very closely and I try to come up with good ideas. This is one of the hardest videos I've had to film for One Piece, actually. Just because, one, there's a ton of content in this arc, but also just trying to formulate how I could feel so high and low about something all at once. It's a difficult task. So this is like the third time I'm trying to shoot this video. And this time I put the negatives up front. And I think that was the right decision, I hope. Let's talk about what I love, because there's a lot to love in SKYPIEA, in my opinion. Where Alabasta covered really what was going on with a civil war with some outside forces meddling in national or state affairs. The stakes feel similar of things coming to an end for these people in their land. However, it is not about a civil war. It is way more about imperialism and colonialism and what does progress mean for a culture who is maybe a little bit more remote and removed from the world and the technological advances. What progress means, especially alongside of things like a strong culture, customs, and religion. That's a very tough question. There's a lot of tough questions about that. And there are few, if any, easy answers. I think that Wyper was absolutely a great way of exploring this, and only because we also get Ganfor, which I believe was my favorite character out of the new ones that we met in SKYPIEA. Ganfor, the Sky Knight, Pierre, his Pegasus bird thing was great. I loved all that. I think Wyper and his relationship and showing both sides of the equation is what makes this really good. Thematically, this arc is as good as anything that we have seen. As far as themes go, I thought Drum Island was excellent. Everybody knows that. That's like my hottest take, I think, with One Piece, is that I just love Drum Island so very much. Thematically, this feels almost as good as anything else that I've read in One Piece. However, I wish more time would have maybe been given to Ganfor and Wyper, rather than some of the more repetitive fights and stuff like that. I do understand that that's probably not what the people come for. They want action. They want the wows. I think that there's a lot of good stuff to dig into, and Oda did do a very nice job of it. Religion, injustice, being an oppressive system, and making people comply is a big thing in SKYPIEA. We see this whenever the crew doesn't end up paying their entry fee, and then they find out to clear your legal status, it is 10x what the entry fee would have been, which makes your crime literally unpayable. Like, there's no way that you could ever pay that back whenever you do the conversion rate, which, by the way, I really like the economics. It's like a weird nerd thing I'm into. I like different denominations of money and the conversion rates. I always think that's really cool when it's included in any type of story, especially a fantasy story. But how would anyone ever be able to pay this? It's unreasonable. Every single crime that you end up committing, whether on purpose or not, puts you further and further behind. This is a losing system, and I'll be honest with you, it reminds me a lot of real life. If you've ever overdrafted your bank account, at least here in the United States, you know that, hey, you ran out of money. We're going to charge you a $34 fee for running out of money. And every day you'll get a new fee. And it's just like, well, how do you expect the person who didn't have money in their account to pay this back? Like, you're just on the back foot, and it is a slippery slope to debt and to very hard times. So I thought this was very relatable, and I like this. I mean, I don't like the system, but I like the way Oda presented it. And it's through these rules and laws that we find out that that ship that we saw back in Jaya, well, that ship was exiled to the Sky Island, and that is basically the sentence that our Straw Hat crew had also been given. So I thought that was a cool callback to Jaya. All the callbacks to Jaya in this arc were fantastic. Maybe the best example of the oppression that we're seeing through this kind of religious justice system would be Conis, and I hope I'm pronouncing her name correctly. But her breaking down and then telling the Straw Hats that she was the one that ended up calling the services on. The Lobster Express is what it was called, which I thought was, by the way, pretty cool. It was a big shock to me. I did not expect that. Conis is such a sweet and lovely individual, as was her father. This place is ruled very oppressively, and it feels like forced compliance through very strict rules, and it can even affect the sweetest, kindest of hearted people like Conis. We also get a bit of commentary on technological progression and how that affects not only just simple inventions for science, but the efforts of war as well. I love the dials. I think this is some of the coolest stuff in One Piece thus far, but Ganfor was completely correct whenever he said that men will always find a way of taking something useful and turning it into a weapon. There's no argument about that. That is exactly how progress in the tech sector has worked for many, many, many decades and centuries, even going back to something like the Gatling gun, which was invented, a new piece of technology that they thought would scare people off from seeing how dangerous it was and the massacre it left behind, that would end wars, and it turns out that wasn't true. You have all the Jack and the Beanstalk imagery to go along with all this technological advancement, and I just think that there's some really nice metaphors and imagery here, especially when you have technology like the dials, but also the devil fruit, making men seem more than human and able to giving them a status that is one level above, maybe even a deity, some would say, like the kami. And how it just seems that humans or sentient beings do not do super well with power. While all the new technology was really cool, the application of the new technology was very, very fascinating to see, mixing with some of the stuff that we've seen prior to SKYPIEA, like the Sea Prism stuff. Like when Wyper uses the Sea Prism to kind of counter the reject dial, I thought all that was so sick and so dope. This is getting down to a very intricate level, and again, I'm only like a fourth of the way through the published chapters, if that, and it feels like the magic and the ability chart for this series is just out of this world. It's getting harder and harder to keep track of, and it feels like it's only scratching the surface right now. This stuff's blowing my mind. This is the good stuff of SKYPIEA, though, and I'm trying to keep track. And then you have Mantra. I mean, the power to listen, to give you almost a glimpse into the future, it seems. This seems incredibly powerful and OP. And the fact that Ganforce says that no one knows how it works beyond this country is going to be a major deal later on. There's no way that Mantra is exclusive to the Sky People, and there's absolutely no way that we're not going to see this, I think, in the future in One Piece as well. So this is the stuff, whereas a lot of the themes were way more on the nose, I felt as if in the background, the world building and the tech stuff is really the nitty-gritty details that we have to pay attention to when it comes to like foreshadowing. Could you imagine if Luffy had the mantra? Like, he would be unstoppable, and I kind of want to see that now. While the character designs were not my favorite, as I mentioned before, I do want to say that I thought the art style of Lovely Street was amazing. The the Arc Maxim design was mind-blowing. One of the best things, I think, as far as art goes in the series this far. And am I the only one that feels that SKYPIEA was a bit of a level up when it came to the art? Like, there are some double panels in this section that I thought were just really, really impressive. I have always been a really big fan of things like Berserk and a little bit of Vagabond that I have read. And this was the first time where I opened up a double panel, and some of the times kind of caught me off guard. Some of it is really magnificent, especially the Golden City of Shandora. I thought that double panel was amazing. Did anybody else feel like Oda kind of leveled up here when it came to art, or is it just me? Out of Enel's crew, the one character model I did enjoy, the one character I enjoyed all the way through his little short time on the page was Om. Is it Om or Om? I'm just going to say Om. We'll stick with Om for this video. Om's little spiel about humans being so fragile, but continuing to want to fight was really compelling to me. And he has a little section where he says, they were born hoping for happiness and destroy each other in their pursuit of it. And if that's true, they would be better off not fighting. One can't escape human pity. His solution is that they must die. They all must die. That solution's pretty poor, isn't it? But he does have a bit of a point when it comes to the fact that we are so fragile and human life is, fleeting. However, we just continue to fight. Obviously, their messed up solution to this is to just wipe us out and put us at peace in general, which is horrendous. Om was probably my favorite non-main villain here. Like, Enel is obviously the big baddie, which he has his negatives and his positive. I was just sad that he didn't live up to Sir Crocodile. But the crew also has just a couple good moments here. I will say this off the bat. I feel like Sanji had a great moment whenever he had the kick on Enel and he kind of rescues Nami and everything. However, him constantly being driven by Nami for lust or love or whatever is getting a little tiresome, just a little bit. He's a lover boy. I get it. I've always said, I should say since I started the series, that I feel like there's so much more to Sanji, and I want to find out, and that he just seems very mysterious, especially with like the inconsistencies in his backstory, not having the full picture of that. But in his present day form of just being driven by Nami, it's okay. It is getting a little bit tiresome, but he did have a great moment with the kick. So I thought he was the most disappointing crew member in this arc for me. Let's get to the ones that I really, really liked, though. Chopper had a lot more page time here. Still not getting the big shine up that I really wanted. But seeing him actually get some page time and some lines outside of just being scared or a couple like wink nudges with Usopp was great. I was happy to see that. And then Usopp was phenomenal in this arc, even though he took a little bit of a back seat. I think the dials are going to be really interesting with him kind of being the engineer of the crew, and how is he going to improve the things that he's already handed out to the crew will be really cool. But he also was just absolutely hilarious. When he was listening to first Sanji's heartbeat, but he was listening on the wrong side, I laughed out loud. And I read it like 3 times. I thought it was great. But Usopp also does a really caring thing for Chopper. And he tells Chopper they can replace the mask, but they can't replace him. And it's simple lines like this, and you see Chopper's reaction, and you realize that like Chopper is still accepting the fact that he is loved by people. And it reminds you of Chopper's backstory, which is so sentimental for me, and such a human connection to this little reindeer, which people never think he's actually a reindeer, which is also really funny. But Usopp, to me, like silently was just excellent in this arc. And I have a couple thoughts about Robin and Zoro, which were like the standouts as far as like up front. Like I said, Usopp in the background was just doing great things. And Zoro, there's some mystery to there, but we'll talk about it in a second. I kind of want to talk about some genuine wow moments because there were quite a few in this. Obviously, finding the Golden City was absolutely ridiculous. Seeing the kingdom come for the first time blew my mind. But also there's moments like Ganfor, Nami, and Aisa getting swallowed by the serpent that like literally had my jaw dropping. Or Wyper watched Enel blast Rikka. I was like, wow. Sometimes I forget that One Piece can be a little bit brutal. So even though, you know, this side cast wasn't my favorite of the people in SKYPIEA of any of the arcs, they still had some really great moments. Oh, and also Rikka, whatever she is trying to get the Vars and bring it back to Aisa, I thought all that was adorable. But she ends up mentioning a type of devil fruit called the Logia or Logia. And she's the first person ever to mention this type, and she talks about how Rumble Rumble was the most powerful of all those types. And I'm very curious of why that is and what are the other types of this fruit. And it just seems like devil fruit is a can of worms that we just have not fully opened yet. So I was keeping my eye on this. And then there's Luffy. Come on, guys. I mean, he's the main character. He's the rubber man. He counters lightning, which was, I mean, how dumb is Enel? Enel has to be one of the dumbest villains. His skills are far greater. Like the things that he has gathered, the tech and the abilities and everything are far greater than his intellect because the dude is dumb. Clearly rubber would be countered. And I know that maybe he didn't know. I don't know. He came off kind of stupid to me, but Luffy had a couple great moments here. I thought the relationship between him and Nami was built up very, very well here. And when Luffy confronts Enel and he says, "What did you do to my crew?" It's like, man, how is this little silly rubber kid who a lot of people think is a dope, how is he so epic in these moments and get me so hyped up? Luffy telling Nami to stop looking so pathetic is that big character, you know, relationship moment that I was looking for, and says she's a member of the future king of the majestic sea, so she better act like it. Let's go. Nami sometimes needs a little kick in the backside to get going, and I think she even showed a lot of progress in this arc, and she kind of got that nudge from Luffy. So Luffy continues to be a motivator, and we know that his crew believes in him time and time again, but Zoro telling Wyper that once Luffy has his mind set on something, there's no way to change his mind and that he will just do it is everything that I love about Luffy. And you can tell that Zoro really believes it, and that's cool. Of course, Luffy wanting to ring the bell for the diamond-shaped dude and the monkeys down below in Jaya, and it connecting Wyper and Noland in that whole timeline. Beautiful stuff. A bit emotional, even, I would say. And that is, you know, as we progress through the arc and we got through a little bit of the repetitiveness and Enel beating up every single crew member again and again and again, this is where it all started to come together for me, is when Luffy started stepping up. And that's why by the end of this thing, I was fired up and like, I'm ready to go into the next arc. I don't know what it is. It's not Water 7. There's something before that. But that's what I'm saying. Like when this ended, it was as good of an ending as anything else for me. Noland was Kalgara's close friend. And this flashback to 400 years ago was everything this arc needed to turn around for me and become what I would consider a very good to a great arc. The Shandora god was a serpent, which kind of threw me for a loop. They kind of mentioned that that's the form that the god had taken, so I don't know if their god had like changed forms over time or they had different type of beliefs. But when Noland sees the plague has basically just ripped through this land and he starts to take action, is whenever that I think you can just tell that Noland was a heck of a guy. The Shandoran people think that this isn't a plague. They have no idea. So they think it is a mark of an evil spirit, which we did see back in history whenever, you know, we were first trying to eradicate a lot of diseases. And Noland ends up killing their god, essentially their serpent god, because they're doing a blood sacrifice, and it's Wyper's daughter. So I think that the conviction that Wyper would put his daughter up for a blood sacrifice shows that these aren't people who are just barbaric for being barbaric sake. They truly believe these things. And it's really, really easy to look at cultures that are outside of our own and think about how dumb they are or evil that they might be. But when someone has true, you know, unshakable belief in something, and this is what their culture is, I think that's a sympathetic cause, and I think it does make logical sense within that population. And then Noland saving it, causing a big fuss. You know, they think that he's a god killer at this point, but him staying the straight and narrow. Like, he could have just busted out, tried to get out of there or whatever, but he handled it so well, which makes Noland a phenomenal character. I think Noland really shines. And then Kalgara, I think I said Wyper before, I apologize, but Kalgara in this story is also very relatable. I ended up liking Kalgara a little bit more than Wyper, actually. Noland also mentions a North Blue botanist that ends up finding the antidote that cures this plague. And I'm just wondering, who is this botanist, and will we see this botanist in the future? I bet we do. And in the panel of Shandora, the City of Gold in all of its glory was absolutely awe-inspiring. You add that with the bromance between Kalgara and Noland and all the complications that come with that, and the tree fever, the fact that it is actually in the ancestor trees and they chop them down, and this big miscommunication. Again, Noland just trying to do the right thing, but there being a bit of a cultural barrier was so tough to see. I really bought into that bromance, even though it happens, pretty quickly on page. It made this flashback feel necessary. I thought the pacing of it was actually great, and adds some much needed weight to the current situation we get back to the present time with the Shandorans. This was Oda's best move in this arc, I think, to really sell me on the story. And then we got to talk about Noland's execution. Folks, there is no justice in the world. I know that, like, by the end, we're trying to spin it in a way where it's like, oh, it all worked out and everything, but there's no justice that was done there. And if anything gets me more angry, it's when people in charge disperse justice in the wrong manner. They disperse injustice and making definitive decisions without all the facts. Not being able to believe someone because you didn't immediately get your evidence. And this is why One Piece isn't just like lighthearted fun and comedy. This is extraordinarily heavy stuff, very real stuff, and it did evoke a genuine emotion out of me. And that is something that only stories that are really special can do. But there's also a lot of happy stuff that comes from it, like the snake being linked to the serpent in Noland's time that we see in the present day. I really like that. I'm a big fan of the way Oda does wildlife, which you guys already know. But oh my God, when we found out that the big mystery shadowy monsters that we saw in the sea in Jaya, and I was like, what in the world is that? When we find out it's shadows of the sky people, I know it's silly. My mind was blown. I loved it so much. I had a eureka moment, like, oh shit. I really loved it. This is one of the better reveals for me in this arc. So it's good that we do get some of these cool reveals and moments to balance out what I felt was very anger-inducing in a good way. Oda is doing a great job of exploring these things. How about Enel surviving this whole thing, and then he's off to the Endless Vars, which, am I wrong in saying that it was the moon that he was heading towards? And we heard that he blew up like where he grew up. It kind of sounded like he may have been going back to that, or he had heard about that. Are we going to the moon? Like, are we going to see Enel on the moon? Are we going to see aliens and sci-fi in One Piece? Because that would be insane. I'm here for it. And as if wondering where the moon and the aliens might come into play is a mystery enough, I did notice a little bit of subtlety when it came to Zoro and Robin's interactions in this arc. And at first I thought I was crazy, but then a follow-up scene later made me go back to my notes and say, no, I need to mention this in the video. So before the crew gets off the boat at the very beginning of the arc, there's a really interesting, subtle, couple line interaction between Robin and Zoro. And she asked if this is what adventure is to him. And it hadn't been for her. And in just the way it was, like, it felt like Robin was coming from a place of knowing a little bit more about Zoro than everybody else. And maybe Zoro isn't what she expected out of like a former bounty hunter or something. And Zoro just kind of says, like, yeah, it is. And you can tell that Robin's changing in this moment. So I thought maybe it was just to show off that these people are changing and they're not exactly what they used to be. But then later on towards the end, when Zoro falls into ruins and claims he almost died, Robin quietly says, you would have if you were normal, or he would have if he were normal. I feel like there's some underlining knowledge about Zoro that Robin has. And maybe I'm crazy. Maybe I'm reaching a little bit too far. But I'm going to be keeping an eye on these two. I got my peepers peeled, and I need to figure out exactly what they're on about. Robin knows something. And then we could talk about Robin and just her achievements in this and everything we get. Oh my God. Nico Robin is my favorite character. Official. Has definitely surpassed Usopp as my favorite. Her going around the ruins, getting an understanding of the land and where things lie, cutting open the cloud, going down into it, and the more area she finds, the more area that she understands. Like, seriously, you could give me an entire side series of just Nico Robin going around and reading historical facts and uncovering mysteries, and I would read it in a heartbeat. I love this stuff. Her finding Shandora, and in that moment, and piecing together where the bell must be is some of my favorite moments in One Piece thus far. I really mean that. And then for her to understand that the poneglyph and this kind of script that has been fought over for so many years that these people found to be so important was such a good flex of her skills and how it's going to impact the people around her and the crew's mission as a whole. And hold the phone, folks, because the poneglyph is mentioning some other super weapon named after the god Poseidon. Just like I think it was the Pluton weapon on Alabasta. These are weapons of mass destruction, I'm starting to guess. What in the world are we in here for? And Robin's like, I don't care about any of that. Which I'm thinking, Robin, you should probably care about that. Because if someone uses these weapons, there's not going to be any history left. She's the one that realizes that Roger had been here 20 years ago, and that he had written on the poneglyph, and Robin now knows that she must guide the poneglyph documents all the way to Raftel, which is the end of the line for this crew. This is the stuff that I was wanting. A Roger tie-in, more stuff about the poneglyph, the lost or invisible history, and then Raftel gets mentioned here. How can you not love this Nico Robin storyline? That's not the only Roger stuff, though. We get the fact that Ganfor says that Luffy reminds him a lot of Roger, and that Robin agrees and says that the D can't just be a coincidence, and she says that he is destined to leave his mark. Is he a relative of Roger? I don't know, but Destiny and Luffy seem to go in the same sentence quite often, and there is definitely a reason for that. And then we are back to the Blue Sea with the help of one of the more creative things in this arc, which was like an octopus hot air balloon type deal. I really enjoyed that. I want to talk about some questions and notes that I had in this arc. And obviously, if the answer is a spoiler, don't leave it in the comments. I don't want to be spoiled, so I'm a first-time reader. But these are just things I took note of, have questions about, that I kind of want to have documentation for so I can come back and go, oh, that's what that was later if I do get an answer at all. I did want to note that some of the cover stories here were really cool, but I'll mention those at the very end of this video. Was it Roger who told these people about Noland? Or no? Because that's something I couldn't tell exactly. If he was the one 20 years ago that came and told Noland, it felt like they knew about that a little bit further in the past. So who was it? Shanks? I don't know. So that's a question I have, and it might just be a little bit of a misunderstanding on my part. Oh, and I wrote this down. Wyper calls Luffy a Paramechia user? I don't know. And then Enel calls Luffy a Paramythia, which must be a classification of devil fruit, I assume. So there's some terms being thrown around here that, one, I certainly can't pronounce, and two, I don't know about. So I did take note of that in my notes. And another kind of thing that I took note of, but I don't know, and this might be another misconception on my part, but whoever fixed the merry-go, or the going merry, most likely are the ones who pulled Pierre and Ganfor and Chopper to safety whenever they were in the forest. Who did that? Did I miss it? Was it explained, or was it never answered? Is someone like shadowing and following the crew all along? I don't feel like that's the case. I think that's me going too conspiracy. I think I just missed who drugged them out of the forest. So if it's not a spoiler and I was supposed to know, please tell me in the comments. How'd the dial get on the crew's waiver? Because I think they even said, like, oh, our waiver, we have a waiver that we found, and there was a dial on it. And the guy was like, well, how did it get on there? So I'm very curious about that. By the way, waivers or jet skis, whatever you want to call them, they're pretty cool. I really, really like that. And that's kind of it for notes and questions of it. But the cover stories, I just wanted to say Dalton being King of the Cherry Blossoms on chapter 243 cover. I pumped my fist. I loved it. I already said Drum Island was the jam. I loved that. Wapol. Wapol going through this redemption arc on the covers only to go for world domination once again after going corporate. I was like, God, Wapol, you were almost redeemed. Like, you almost did it, but I guess people just don't change. And it was very cool to see Ace on the covers, which I assume in the anime maybe they were using as filler episodes. I'm not positive, but watching him chase down Blackbeard and him having interactions with people, burning up some important secret documentation from the Marines, is that going to have an effect later in the story? Because I know these are canon. Who knows? But I liked seeing Ace. I thought that was really cool. And those are my thoughts for the SKYPIEA arc. I will be moving on to the next arc and getting a video out for that hopefully in the next week or two. And I'm also going to be doing One Piece Netflix trailer reaction. The second trailer came out and people said there's a little bit more content there. So I think I am finally going to give my thoughts as a first-time reader, someone that's a new fan to the series, on what I'm expecting and what I think. I am very, very excited for the show, and I definitely will be doing videos covering it here as well. Did you love or hate SKYPIEA? Because I don't think anyone in the middle really exists. I'm more towards loving it than hating it, but I do feel like I had a very mixed experience, as you could tell here. It's not the best arc, but I still think it's good, and I have a feeling that a lot of the building blocks from here, you know, I think it's going to be important in the overall story, which is really what we have to expect from some arcs whenever it comes to a story this large. So I think that's really cool. I want to thank you so much for taking time out of your day to check this out. This is a hard video to make just because of how polarizing this arc was for me personally, but also just the sheer amount of content. So I hope that I did an okay job at relaying my feelings about the story to you and my overall takeaways and my thoughts. So thank you so much for taking time out of your day to watch this. If you liked it, you can hit like. If you dislike, you can hit dislike. And if you want to join us here on the journey, you can always hit subscribe. And until I see you next time, be good, be safe, and I'll see you again real soon here on Dudes Talking Manga.